My name is Alex McGee, and I am interviewing Coco Papy for Georgia State University's Women's March Oral History Project. The date is July 15th, 2017, and the interview is taking place at the Georgia Historical Society in Savannah, Georgia. All right, so first question, what year were you born and where were you born?
I was born actually here in Savannah.
Okay.
Born and raised, and I was born in 1985.
Okay. And then can you describe your family's political leanings?
Sure. I would say my mom she would not politically align herself, but I would say she comes from a working class background, so feminism was not a word that she heard, right? That was not a word that she was familiar with growing up, but I would say that the way in which she sort of sailed the ship of her life was very much in line with that, right? My father, a little bit different, a little bit more from an economically privileged background. I would say political in the way that you just kind of end up if you're a white guy in Savannah for the most part, right? Which is unless it personally affects you, maybe, you're not anti it, but you don't have to be aware of it, right?
Yeah.
So.
And then what is your profession?
So I work as a community manager at an organization called the Creative Coast. We're economic development, and we specifically work to grow the creative economy in Savannah so that we don't bleed out really thoughtful, wonderful people to other cities.
Awesome. How long have you been there?
A month.
Oh.
But before I was in education, so my background is in art and art education.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then what political party do you support?
I'll always kind of fall in line with my Democrat folks, right? I'm part of the Georgia Win Academy. That's where I primarily find my allegiances and the people who I feel best represent me. I think most folks in the country right now, I feel we're in a little bit of a spiritual crisis mode of being okay, this game plan ain't working, so what next? I think it's been really interesting to watch the past few campaigns and sort of see Democrats try and sort of appeal to soft Republicans, right? As opposed to sort of engage the party that's there, I guess. Right. So it's interesting, and I think that's just part of the cultural moment we're in. Yeah.
Okay, and then have you been involved in political activities in the past? If so, please describe them.
Can you expand on that?
That's what the question is, but I guess basically were you involved in a political party or an organization that aligns with the political movement?
I have found myself as a community organizer and more so very involved in movement work. So, I was sort of a lot of my very current sense of political sort of, or even approach towards community organizing comes out of the Highlander Center, where I was really fortunate to be a Greensboro Justice Fellow. And Highlander, they're really a catalyst of Southern organizing here.
Are they here in Savannah?
They're not here in Savannah, so they're up in Appalachia, but they were founded in early 1920s, don't quote me on that, but they were one of the first organizations. They did labor organizing, but they were one of the first organizations to do interracial organizing, specifically centered around civil rights. And so
so they have a long history.
They have a huge, beautiful history, and not a lot of people know about them. But
I've never heard of them.
When people are oh, Rosa Parks just sat down on a bus one day, I'm no, Rosa Parks went through Highlander and was trained and reared and grown up as an organizer through there, right? So, and they have deep roots in St. John's Island, where Septima Clark did a lot of work with the Freedom Schools, and they went from labor to civil to environmental with coal ash, and now they're really about connecting grassroots organizers, not only in the South but in the global South. So their work is really expansive and comes from a place of you have to marry the cultural and the language, and you have to marry it all, right? And it's like big and messy and sloppy, but you have to do it.
But you have to do it
love.
to be effective. Yeah. So you attended, or you were a fellow, you said a Greensboro fellow with the Highlander Camp. So when was that?
So I officially became a fellow 2016, I think. Yeah. But before, I had been organizing in Savannah through a project called Emergent Savannah, which we sought out to basically marry cultural work and civic involvement. There's a lot of smart, thoughtful, creative people here who are just like, feel like they're just shut out of the political process, and we really wanted to marry that together. Before I came back home, I was living in Brooklyn, and I tried like hell to get involved in different sort of movement spaces, and truth be told, it was very difficult for me, especially I felt like kind of like yelling into an echo chamber, right? But it also, I would just find myself in so many conversations where I felt like the South was deeply, deeply misunderstood, and I thought the only way I'm going to be able to change that is move back home, right? So.
Awesome. Well, that is totally the right answer to the question, so we're good. Okay. Do you have family members who have participated in activist movements? And then if they have, describe their activities. It sounds like you kind of were saying
no,
not so much.
Yeah, not so much. I mean, I think my mom's heart has always sort of been centered on the side of like, yes to everything, all justice, but is she out there in the streets like holding a sign? No. Does she donate to Planned Parenthood? Yeah.
Okay. That's something.
Yeah, that's something. My grandmother, a lot of people describe her as an activist. I don't really see her through that lens. She was she and Miriam Center, who actually went on the march, were two of the first women in Savannah to be able to go into real estate. And one of the first things that they did was they began trying to cultivate Black homeowners.
Yeah, okay.
Is that like a radical act of activism? Like in my frame, no. But I think, do I understand the importance of it in the time that happened? Yes. Do I think that we should be like praising and exalting it? Like, I don't know. Like, that's a very complicated question, right? Especially like in the South and all of that. But yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Have you participated in a march before?
Yes.
Okay, can you talk about them?
So my first march was the G20 summit here in
down at Sea Island.
Sea Island and in Savannah. That was sort of my first exposure to.
Was that 2004? What year was
it?
That?
It was definitely. I was in high school. So,
it was because it was Bush was president.
Yeah, because Bush was president, and it was not long after the Iraq War came out because we had set up sort of a rally in Johnson Square, and I very vividly remember like the pushback, right? Sort of the very reactive like moment that we were in as like a country, right? There was like you could not speak out against anything there was no gray area.
Yeah.
And as like a high schooler, that's kind of intimidating, right? But so we marched in Savannah, and that was sort of my first intro to it. I've done different marches through, different women's movements, specifically centered around reproductive justice, reproductive health. I was involved in Occupy.
Okay.
But yeah.
All right, and then why did you march on January 21st? Yeah, 21st.
So I remember like the morning after the election, right? Like there was this palpable sense of like, oh shit, right? And people were really upset, and I think a lot of it just also comes from like my mom's like point of life, which is like there are no time for tears in the Pappy house, right? Like, but like also just the idea that like we don't have time to be upset, right?
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily the most empathetic response, right? But for me, it was like, okay, like this is real, and like there ain't no turning back, and like we gotta do something, right? So like my gut impulse was like, what? Okay, like what now, right?
Right.
You know, and through different sort of, it was just kind of like it was a blowing up of connections, and all of a sudden you had all these people sort of aired out in the open, and you're like, oh, like I didn't know you were doing this or you were doing this.
Right.
And somehow through that messiness I got connected to the national group of organizers, the original like kind of 5 folks who were leading the Women's March. And it was kind of a mess just because of I think, you know, again, it was majority like white women, middle-aged women, kind of leading the sort of way. And there was a lot of conversation about that, and I was not necessarily involved in that, but through that I got I kind of found my place within the state organizers of Georgia. Lindsay Arundel, Naja Payne, Hannah Lodge, God, I'm like totally blanking out. But just like this really kind of like let's do it sort of badass group of women, which was led majority by like women of color, and that's like what I wanted to be a part of, right? I was like, I don't really want to keep seeing the same mistakes made over and over. Like I want to try something different. And I think the national group finally evolved into sort of the group it did now.
Yeah.
And that has been really sort of wonderful to watch. To see those voices amplified and to sort of see the conversation around like the women's movement sort of really expand into the
Beyond
places. Expand into something like much larger, which has been really exciting, and like that's something I want to be a part of. I don't want to be a part of something that's like we only focus on these things, right? It's so much more bigger and complicated. So that's really that's kind of the messiness of how I got there, right?
Right. And then which march did you attend, and why did you choose to attend that particular march?
Sure. So I went to the Women's March in Washington, D.C. I felt that it was important that I be there.
The one in D.C.
Yeah. Culturally, I felt like it would be a thing that I needed to be a part of. But I also felt like it would be really easy for me to get there, right? I was like, I'll just drive, right? Like, I can drive. I have a car. I have gas. Like, the bigger challenge was, like, okay, I can be a part of this, but then how does this larger community that I'm a part of, how are we a part of this? So kind of in tandem, there was... it was kind of like, all right, let's do this. Like, I'm leading this charge. Like, if you want to be a part of it, like, cool, we're going to work on it. If not, like, that's totally cool. Like, but we're going to find out a way for you to do this. And so I, through the state organizing, the Georgia chapter, I was sort of set to activate sort of our community, but then also sort of low country area. But also just interact with different women throughout the state, whatever it was they needed, whether that was like, hey, like I have like 1,000 questions about transportation, or like, you know, like what do I need to bring, or, you know, just, I mean, looking back, it's just grunt work, right? Yeah. It's just like, it's talking to a lot of people.
Logistics.
Yeah. And just like trying to be like, okay, like we're going to figure out how to do this thing that feels kind of not possible because we've never done it before, right?
Okay, and then can you tell me about the process of planning to take a bus? Because I'm assuming, I know you were involved in setting up the buses. Did you end up driving or did you take a bus?
I drove
Okay.
because I specifically wanted to get up there early
Okay.
to meet with a few other organizers and with friends who I knew would be in the area.
Yeah.
But I worked with this amazing team of women through the Georgia State organizers to like make this happen, right?
Yeah.
So like Lindsay Arundel was really like a huge component of like making the transportation happen. You know, she booked the buses, she did the research on the bus companies, and then she just like would hand that off to me and be like, make sure people get on the bus. That was it, right? Like, and so, you know, taking that information, I was able to hand it off to my community and be like, you know, like, if you can afford a seat, great. If you can't go, but you can afford a seat, buy a seat for someone, right? Like, empower them to go. You know, so we worked with, like, sliding scale cost and, you know, like, are these buses ADA friendly? Like, what happens if someone's in a wheelchair? Or, like, you know, you just, there's just a lot that goes into it and making sure that like people can access something, right? And like sometimes you hit the nail on the head and sometimes you're like someone has to bring something to your attention so that you'll recognize it, right? And both are good.
Yeah. Okay, and then what issue is the most important to you? I guess like for why you went to the march and participated.
I don't think there's like one specific issue. I think it's all connected, right? You know, reproductive health is connected to the policing of black and brown bodies, and it's connected to, you know, who gets to access like capital and break out of certain classes, right? And that's connected to, you know, who gets to access healthcare. Like it's all connected, right? But I think for me, for going, I think that women really, we are in this position where we have to come to the forefront, right? And not just like some of us who are like, you know, like acceptably like women, right? Like not just like the ones like not like your Sheryl Sandbergs and like your like what, right? Like not like the nice acceptable women who are like, yeah, like, you know, I did this and like, but like all different sort of all different people who sort of encompass that. And I think the umbrella of womanhood is like wide and expansive, which makes it something that is easy for many things to fit under, right? So like when people ask me like, well, like, what's the top women's issue? And I was like, well, it's all, you know, immigration is a women's issue. If your family is being broken up, like, that's a woman's issue, right? If, like, your son got shot in the street by a cop, that's a woman's issue, right? So it's not, I think, like, the umbrella of womanhood offers this really great flexibility and power to sort of bring to light many, many different issues. You know, not so much in the past, but I think now is this really right moment for that.
What issues did you see represented at the march you attended, and how do you feel about those issues?
It was very different from a lot of marches that I have been in. It was not violent. It was not heavily policed. It was like thousands upon thousands of people. I was like, I've never seen anything this large before. And I remember there was this one moment where we had sort of gotten stuck in a corner, and I was just like, I have to like figure out how we can get out of this like little corner. And I remember like Clinton climbing up in a tree, right? Like, and he's just like, oh my God. And I was like, what? And he takes this photo and then he shows it to me, and it's just waves upon waves upon waves of just like bodies. And I had never sort of experienced anything like that. So the fact that you had all these people really galvanized by this moment was incredible. I think sometimes it got boiled down to pink pussy hats and like, you know, just like you know, a lot of like pro-Hillary rhetoric, like, yeah, but I also think that it, you know, it ignited a moment for a lot of conversations to happen. And I hope those conversations keep growing, right? Because it's not just like pink pussy hats and like pro-Hillary rhetoric, right? Like, I'm one of those, like, I'm definitely one of those women who is like, I guess I'm for her, right? And I tell people that and they get so upset. And I'm like, but it's not like, I just didn't think that's like who, like, I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to not vote for her. But like, I also think that like, we can like, there are more exciting leaders that can be in that position who I think can like get us to a point where we need to be, and like that's what we need to be reaching for, right? Which is a really complicated thing to say, right? You know, and it invokes a lot of feelings in people. But you know, if anything, I think it was a real catalyst moment for people to have a lot of different conversations they had never had before. Like, I think my favorite moment from the march was like, there's this photo. And it's these two women in pink pussy hats, and they're taking selfies of themselves. And there's this woman, and she's a black woman, and she's carrying this sign, and it's like, you know, 51% of women voted for Trump, and she's sucking on a lollipop. Like, she has done this before. Yeah. And that photo upset so many people. And I was just like, no, like, them's the stats. Yeah, So, like, what does that mean? Like, I get that, like, you and I and like all these other people are like really upset with like the fact that like we don't think this represents us, but like there are a bunch of folks who look like us who like do think that's okay, right? So like, where does that leave us to do our work? So I think moments like that are really like necessary.
Yeah. So I guess that kind of touches on that whole idea of like, would you say like race in America, and like what are the divisions, but like what other issues did you see like come up, like I guess in signs or like even like conversations that happened at the march itself?
I mean, I think the thing that I saw the most was the fact that like women really made sure to watch out for one another, right? And like that is just my experience. I know women with very different experiences. Like I know one woman who was like, she wore her jingle dress, right? Because she's from, you know, I think she was from Potawatomi, and she wore a jingle dress, and you know, she had women try and touch her jingle dress, and she's like, don't do that, like don't do that, right? You know, so her experience was vastly different from mine, but from like what I saw was women really trying to take care of one another, right? So like it would be super crowded and someone with like a wheelchair would get through, and you would see like women kind of like just do whatever they could to make that possible, right? You know, if someone was thirsty, all of a sudden it'd be like 30 water bottles, right? It was just, I think that's something that is really necessary in doing like any type of social justice work, which is like, we're not just like reaching for this like one goal, right? Like we have to do it, and we have to actually like give a shit about each other. And I think sometimes I know like in the movement spaces that I've moved, we talk a lot about that, but we don't do it. In fact, we can be really judgmental. Like we can be so fucking judgmental and mean and nasty, and it's not healthy, right? So I think that was something that was really crucial to see, and I would like to see modeled in more instances.
And I feel like you kind of already answered this one. Okay, before the march, what were you expecting or hoping to get out of the experience?
I didn't know. I didn't know what was going to happen. I honestly thought I'd be arrested probably. That was sort of like, I kind of was prepared for that, right? Like that was the thing. I was like, okay, well, this is probably going to happen. I don't really know what will happen after that. And I was really like, oh, that's not how it worked at all, right? And I think especially because like when we were driving up to DC, we were listening to the broadcast of the inauguration, and the J20 was going on behind it, and you could hear it, and it was just like, okay, like this is what we're walking into, right? So we just all need to be prepared. And then it was nothing like that. You know, I don't think marches change things immediately, and I think It's interesting. I had this conversation with a woman. When I say conversation, I had a woman get in front of me the other night and demand that I answer her question. And she was like, why are people marching in the street? And I was like, well, what do you want them to be marching out of? And she's like, everything. Everything's bad. And I was like, well, not everything's bad. Like, she's like, but people should be upset. And I was like, well, they are. And I was like, but there are things that you do other than marching, right? Like, you can't just march all the time. I don't think marches are the one thing that's going to work, right? And like Grace Lee Boggs has this really wonderful quote about, you march and then you do all the other stuff, right? And like that's 10% of it, and it like looks really good and it feels good, but like there's all this other stuff that goes into it too, and it's long, boring, tedious work, and like that's the exciting part. So yeah.
Were your friends and family supportive?
In the way that they probably always have been. I tried to get my mom to come along. I thought it would be really important for her to be a part of it. And she was just like, I don't have money for bail money. Sorry. Like, right. That was like really her, that was really her. She was just like, I 100% support you. I just, like, where I'm financially at, there's no way I could take that risk, right? And I understand that, and I think that's a very real thing. Like, we need to be dealing with in a lot of this work. You know, I'm not very close with my dad. We didn't really have a conversation on that, but the women in my family were like, you know what you have to do in your life, and you just do it. There's not much more conversation on that.
Okay, can you describe the group you traveled and marched with?
Sure. So I drove up to DC with Clinton Edminster, who is, he runs a nonprofit here, and is just like a local mover shaker, awesome person. If there's ever someone you need in Savannah to like get something done, you find Clinton, right? And a woman named Stephanie Rains, who, so we drove up to DC like super early. So originally all the Georgia people, we thought we were going to meet in a park, and apparently we got there early on like I think we were staying on the outskirts of DC, and we like left at like 5:30 in the morning. Wow. And when we got to the train station at like 6, it was like lines, and I was just like, I have never seen anything like this, right? Like, so we get to, like the city center and the park we're supposed to meet all the Georgia people at, and a few of the organizers were there, but we were just like, this is so empty, like what's the deal? And it was
Alright, so we're going to start this question over. Describe the group you traveled and marched with.
So I drove to DC with Clinton Edminster, who leads a local nonprofit here and is just like a general mover and shaker, do-gooder of Savannah, all things, and Stephanie Rains, who is an art historian here. And then our intention was for all the Georgia people to meet in this park the morning of, like early at like 7 in the morning. And when we got there at the park the next morning, there was a few of the key Georgia organizers, and there was a few of Savannah people who had come up the night before, and a few Atlanta people, but I started getting text from people being like, we're trying to get in the city now, there's a ton of traffic, or our bus broke down at like 4 in the morning, so we're an hour away, or people just being like, we're trying to get on the subway, there's like, it's 1,000 people deep, right? So it was just like text after text of being like,
here's why I'm not here.
We're here, but we're not here, right? So the group that was together, we all kind of started walking over towards where we're gonna follow the like massive amounts of women.
Yeah.
And it was funny as we were doing that, we would like see like one another and be like, hey, like come on over. You know, and it was great, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, now we're stuck.
Yeah, this is the spot we were
and now we're stuck. Yeah.
Okay, and then describe your fellow marchers, and then they have a note, everyone around you.
So the group I was in was mostly Savannah people, a few of the state organizers from Atlanta. Mostly, it's interesting, it was either, it was women of all ages. I was like, you know, so we had like, you know, me and Cody Shelley who were in our early 30s, and then we had like, you know, Molly who's like 38, I think, and then we had like Jessica who's like in her 40s, and then we had, you know, there's Jane Fishman and Carmela, and, you know, they're in their 70s, right? Wow. So like, it was, like, I was really surprised at sort of the group who turned it out for Savannah. Like, I was really expecting, I mean, it was still like predominantly white, right? Which was not really ever going to be a surprise to me. But I was really surprised by who I saw showing up, right? And I was like, oh, okay, like, cool. Like the people around us, again, it was, I mean, like, I have this really vivid memory, again, like, of just feeling like complete shit, right? The morning of, and we were all crowded into this one area, and like, you know, it was really, it's a test in people's patience, right? And there's people all around you, and you're like, well, this is totally, I mean, like, there's a woman there who was like I noticed it because I was sitting down, and like she was breastfeeding her like 2-week-old infant. Oh my God. And I was like, oh my God. But like, you know, like total strangers like all around her were like, do you need anything? How can I help you? Like, do you need a break? Like, what do you know, like, it was just, you know, or like there would be a woman with a walker, and again, it'd be like, what do you need? How can I help you? Like, what can we do? Are you comfortable? Right? And so, like, I think that was really, I think that was really crucial for me to see that be done.
Yeah. How did you travel or get to the march that morning? And then can you talk about that experience?
We took the subway, or the metro, and we stayed out. So we were in Maryland. We like spent the night in a place in Maryland, and it was like the last stop on like the red line. Yeah. And we were like, no one's gonna be here, right? And so we left at like, you know, I think we got there at like 5:30, like right before the metro opened, and we got there, and it was like hundreds of people deep, and we're like, oh my God, like, you know, we bought passes the night before, so we were able to like get on the train immediately, but even then it was like packed shoulder to shoulder. That's how we got there.
What were your feelings before, during, and after the march?
Before, it was just like, let's pull this off. Let's make sure people get there. Like the night before, I was like not feeling good. I like had this like horrible story where I threw up on the train in front of this like really lovely mother and her like 12-year-old daughter. They're like, oh, you're an organizer, and I like threw up all over myself, and I was like, I'm not drunk, I promise, I feel really bad. And she was just like, oh, like, and like I hadn't slept because like when we got home, like one of the buses in Savannah never showed up.
Yeah, I remember.
And like all these people were so upset, and I was just like, what, like trying to.
What can you do?
Like, what can I do? Like trying to call and like make sure, like what, you know, just being like, oh God, crisis mode. So like I was operating on like very little sleep at that point. And it kind of been building up to that point as well. Just like trying to make sure that like everyone's on a bus, and you know, like you've got what you need, and like everyone's organized, and so I mean it was exciting, but it was also really draining, and it was one of those things where it's like you just kind of have to have laser focus to get through it. After it,
or during
it was I don't know. I've kind of blanked out of it, right? Like, it was
You're just
exciting.
in it.
Yeah, I mean, but there was a lot of, I think there was just a lot of moments where I was like, oh my God, like, this is very important, right? So, like, I remember seeing this woman there with her dad, who was a Vietnam vet, and she had this sign, and it was like, you know, like, my father fought against, you know, being called, like, you know, insert racial slur here, so that I could grow up in a world where I would not be referred to as, like, a cunt or something, right?
Yeah.
And, like, I remember just, like, looking at that and being like, oh God, like, people have been doing this for a real long time, haven't they? And, like, don't know how good we're doing, right? Where you're like, oh, like, we're getting somewhere, and, like, we're not somewhere at all, right? So there were a lot of moments like that where you're just like, okay, like, one foot in front of the other. And so afterwards, I mean, like, we all were, you know, kind of exhilarated and, like, happy and tired, and then I was, like, sick for a week.
Oh my gosh.
So I was, like, just, like, sick, passed out for a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, that sounds horrible. Describe the atmosphere at the rally and the march.
So we were, somehow or another, there was, like, a stage where, like, people were giving speeches, and we were close, but not close enough to it, so we couldn't really hear anything, we couldn't see anything, but we were kind of stuck there for a while. And the idea was that this rally would go till, like, maybe 1 or so, and then everyone would march, but the rally ended up going over a long time.
More than a couple hours.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And people were getting really impatient and tired, and, like, you know, I remember there at one point someone in our group was like, I have to go to the bathroom so bad, and this, like, older woman turned around, she's like, if you just go right here, it should be fine, no one will care, right?
Oh
It was just like, oh, so, like, that's where we're at, cool. But it really was, like, I think there was a lot of confusion, I think there's a lot of like, let's do this, like, let's go. Yeah. But I also, like, I say that, like, full well knowing that, like, the work that that goes into, like, planning something like that is innumerous, and, like, how everyone could have predicted that it was going to be that big. Yeah. Like, I don't think anyone could have ever predicted or planned for that. I just don't.
There's no amount of planning.
Yeah, there's no, and so, I mean, it just, at some point, like, people just started moving, and we're like, all right, I guess we're doing this now. Yeah. But there was no rhyme or reason to it. Yeah. But that was also kind of cool, because it was like, all right, I guess the Women's March is just taking over to DC right now. Yeah. So that's what happened.
Yeah. And then, talk about signs. You already talked about one. Can you describe yours and others that you appreciated?
Sure. So we actually, the Savannah group was really, really lucky. There's an artist in town, Panhandle Slum, who, when he heard we were trying to make this happen, was like, I'll make a hand-painted custom sign for every woman who's going, right? Oh, thinking that it would be, like, maybe 50 of us. Yeah. And there was a point where it's just, like, at some point it was, like, 300 women that he was making. And he made, like, 300 signs.
He did do it, yeah.
Yeah, and it was, like, this, you know, like, no one ever saw that coming, right? Yeah. And so there was, like, cardboard collection for, like, Slum, and then people would just be like, give this to Slum, right? So we'd be like, okay, if you want to, like, donate something, because he was like, I'm doing this for free, like, I'll totally, like, that's what I promised, right? Yeah. And so I was just like, y'all, we gotta do something, like, we gotta, you know, and so all of a sudden, like, people started donating for supplies. That's and awesome. Just to, like, pay Slum, and it was like, you know, every day I would get, like, an envelope with, like, $500 in it, and they'd be like, give this to Slum, and I'd be like, oh my god, like, okay. And he was just like, I've never experienced anything like this. Wow. So he made all these beautiful signs that were, you know, all these different women. Like, I think one of my favorite was, like, Lady Chablis, and, like, seeing Lady Chablis, like, represented in DC was really important, because, like, I love the fact that Savannah is, like, represented by, like, a Black trans woman, right? Yeah. Like, I love that. Like, I feel like that's the most Savannah thing possible. Yeah. But the other signs that I saw that were, like, really interesting were, like, No, I mean, everyone loves a good, like, quirky sign, but I think there were ones that were, like, you know, again, like, going back to the woman and her father, I think that was, like, a really important sign for people to see, right? Like, I think that was something that was very powerful. You know, I think the thing that, like, really, that I always deeply appreciate is seeing signs that speak truth to anyone who has been raped or sexually assaulted or had an abortion, right? I think those are very, still, I mean, I think we're getting to a place in culture where we can more openly talk about those things, but, like, we still are not there, even though they're very common. I know it has given me a liberty to be able to talk about my own rape, which has been, like, a very, like, interesting process, right? Of, like, how do you talk about that? It's like, you know, it's like, do you want to, like, cut your wrist open and then, like, kind of, like, bleed for everyone, or, like, how do you talk about those things, right? Like, how do you talk about, like, an abortion, which is one of the most common medical procedures ever, but, like, people feel like if they talk about it, like, there's a value judgment on it, right?
There's a stigma to it.
So I always very personally appreciate those sort of, it's kind of like declarations of freedom, right? It's like, this is my truth, and, like, you gotta, like, I'm dealing with it, you gotta deal with it. Yeah. So
it's part of our culture, whether we like it or not. Yeah. What were your favorite chants?
I don't remember chanting so much. I don't remember chanting so much, right? Okay. No, it's okay. I think the one that there was a woman who, like, in our group was trying to kind of keep up. She was this older woman, and I swear to God, she was like the spirit of, like, Flo Kennedy, you know, like FloJo Kennedy. She was like, I was like, God, this is like, what do we need? But she was trying to keep people's, like, kind of spirits up, and I asked her to do this one that actually, it comes from Dream Defenders, which is a group, sort of, I think they're based primarily in Florida, but they specifically work to protect Black and brown immigrants. But I learned it at Highlander, but I asked her to do it, and the chant, it's a call and response, and so you go power, 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 transformation, and then kind of say that back and forth. Miracles, I want it, I need it, I gotta have it right now, and then you just kind of keep saying that, and it's really, it's a very powerful chant. It's pretty simple. And most people seem like they can relate to it.
Yeah. You kind of said you didn't really hear the speakers, but were there any that you did hear or that you liked or didn't like? Or was there someone that you saw maybe they were going to be speaking and you were like, oh, wow, that's awesome?
I was just excited by the bevy of awesome voices, right? To have, Janet Mock on there is really awesome. To have Linda Sarzor, like, speaking, to, have Angela Davis, like, all these are all badass women, right? These are all cool, badass women who, like, I could listen to all day, every day. Yeah. And so what I actually did was, like, after I got back home, I watched some of the speeches on YouTube, and I was like, these are great! Like, I'm glad I can enjoy them for the comfort of my own bed. Right. But yeah, I mean, I was excited by, I think there were a lot of speakers. There were a lot, yes. But so there are a lot of speakers. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It was the whole day.
Yeah, it was a long day.
Law enforcement, can you describe your interaction with them or how they presented themselves if you did see them?
I did not see a lot of law enforcement. Okay. I, again, like, really thought it was going to be very much the opposite. Like, the group of women that we traveled with, like, we had sort of had this very serious sit down conversation before, being like, okay, I just want to let everyone know, like, this is, like, what you need to prepare for, right? So then the day of, like, what are they saying to cops?
Yeah.
You know, and I've heard lots of varying opinions on why that is, right?
Like, can you...
Yeah, so, like, you know, like, some people are like, well, yeah, like, we didn't, like, of course, like, we didn't need cops. Like, why would violence break out? And then some folks are like, well, like, what cop is gonna, like, beat up an old white lady, right? So, like, there's a lot of sort of differing truths, I think, and all of them are valid. You know, but I don't know. I think they're all valid, right? Yeah. I think it would have looked real bad on the second day in office if, like, you know, a bunch of folks got beat up at a women's march, right? Like, I think with what happened at J20, it's much easier for an institution to justify that because they're like, well, they're damaging property and they're violent and anarchy, like, right? Whereas, like, I think the tone would be very different. But I don't think anyone was also preparing for that. I think people were really preparing for the worst case scenario.
Did you see any opposition protesters?
There was a really small little, like, Bikers for Trump rally going on. And it was really cute. It was, like, really, like...
I think I remember hearing they were going to be there,
And, like, and so we were alerted, like, the Georgia State organizers were alerted that they would be there. And they had started sending some threats to certain organizers. And had basically kind of broadcast that they were going to, like... You know, they'd be like, you know, we're gonna beat these women's asses, which is, like, never a good look, right? But I think there was definitely a lot of anxiety around, like, violence around that, right? And so when we finally ran into them, I mean, like, we're talking a rally that's probably as big as this space, right? And it's like, Bikers for Trump, like... We're like, oh God, there's like 30 people here, right? It was like, this is nothing. And of course, like, you know, there's always like 1 to 2 eager guys who are like, Trump, yeah. But it was just like, oh God, like,
kind of pitiful.
I can't even bother with this, right? This is like. But it was interesting, like, on the train the night before, like, there was this very, like, certain split, right? So you had everyone in their, like, red, like, Make America Great hats, or, like, I'm a deplorable button. You're like, oh God, like. And then you had the folks who were clearly, like, marked by, like, this women's march or J20. And in my sort of perception, the people in the red hats were clearly terrified. Like, were really, and, like, were just very nervous to be on the train. Which I think is just interesting to think about, right? It's just like, you won, like, all right.
What are you afraid?
What are you afraid of? Like, and why are you afraid? Like, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. That's really interesting. What do you think about the coverage in the media of the march?
I think leading up to the march, it was a lot of it focused on the women's march was so divided. And to me, like, that's a really easy thing to talk about because, like, what social movement has not had divisions in it, right? Like, that's not anything new. And I think instead of opportunities to sort of talk about that in a way that that didn't seem so salacious, it like just sort of focused on like divisions in women's march, like, right? But after it happened, there was like this, for me, I noticed a switch in tone, which was like, this amazing thing happened and it was brilliant and beautiful, and it was very like, it was, but it was also like, what next? Right. And you're like, oh God, like, what next? Like give it a week and then we'll figure out what next.
How did you and your group manage to stay together during the march?
We didn't.
You didn't?
No, I mean, a lot of us got split off from
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah.
But a core group of us really stuck together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and like that sometimes took like linking arms and like just making sure that we were all kind of hooked in together.
Yeah, like you couldn't be pulled apart. Right?
Yeah. For the most part, we just kind of did that.
Mm-hmm.
But it also made it really easy when we traveled because our signs were like really, like you could spot one of our signs, like there would be a sea of people and someone would have a sign and we'd be like, yeah, right? And they'd be half a mile away and you'd be like, yay, right? Like, so the signs made it really easy.
Yeah,
it's like you could instantly see all the Savannah people.
Yeah, that's pretty great. Did you feel emotional at any time?
Not on the day of. I think when I felt the most emotion was so when we came back, about 2 weeks afterwards, we held a Stories from the Women's March on Washington.
Mm-hmm.
It was an event at Trinity Church where we invited the community to come in and kind of women who went on the march told their stories.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really long night, right? It like went too long. There were too many people to speak on. There was a woman who totally took over the podium and like she like started ranting like on like something that was super homophobic, and we're like, what is going on? But it was still, I mean, would I change any of it? No, because it's messy community.
Right.
Community's messy, but there is a moment where. One of the things some folks asked was, you know, can we sing I Can't Be Quiet to sort of close it out? And I was like, I think that's a great idea. Yeah. So this group of women came into the church early while we were setting up. And, like, the church at that point, like, people were bringing in their signs and putting them everywhere. And they started singing just to practice. And I'm not a crier, but I just started like weeping and gnashing, and it's probably because I was tired. It's probably because it was also like, oh God, like I like in this safe, sacred space, and like people are all kind of on the same wavelength, right? But there is just something very, very concrete about it that I can't really describe. Yeah.
Can you talk about the trip home? Like describe the mood when you guys were driving back.
We're very tired. Very tired.
Did you come back Sunday? Or
yeah, we drove back Sunday.
Okay.
We like left at like 7 in the morning.
Oh wow.
It was. I mean, I think we didn't really even talk. I mean, of course we talked about the march, but there's a lot more that we talked on. It was more like what next, right? And trying to figure out like, okay, like whenever something really big like this happens, like there's a lot of pressure for it to like succeed like wildly, right? And like I don't think we doubted that the march was successful. I think it was like now there's this plateau that anything associated with this sort of movement will be judged against. And I think that's a really unhealthy thing. You know, people ask me like, oh, what's the Women's March up to now? And I'm like, well, they literally marched from Fairfax yesterday to like the NRA, right? Like they marched like 17 miles, right? And like that's not something we did nationally, but like in Atlanta right now, like Janelle Green and like the other group are like marching to the Department of Justice in Atlanta, right? Like the state justice department. So like there are things happening. It's just not as colossal. And like that's okay. We don't like not everything can be a colossal movement.
Right.
And it's like there's a lot of ideas out there about that, like it's actually like small, sustainable, like thoughtful movements that actually get stuff done.
Right, that bring about change. Let's see. Looking back as one of the organizers for Georgia, can you tell me about some of the challenges you faced as one of the people in charge, and then would you do it again?
I would definitely do it again in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
I think it is just being patient with where everyone's at and where you're at. I, like all people, have a tendency to be impatient or self-righteous or judgmental, and those things do not change anything, right? They just sound really good if you're like yelling at someone, right? Like, but it doesn't really do anything. I think it was having so many people look to you, and that in a lot of ways that sounds like super narcissistic, but like having a lot of people all of a sudden look to you as like a person with answers, and you're like, I am just a flawed, fucked up person just like you. And like the only difference is like I decided that this made sense for me to do, right? You know, and I'm gonna do my best to do it well. So trying to balance that with what people needed, I think, was a really important lesson for me to learn. But also the importance of boundaries, right? Like I think that's, and like stepping back when you need to step back. So like for me, like right now, like I'm in a period where I'm kind of like I've pulled back a little bit, just so I'm like I don't want to be a grumpy burnout person. Yeah. And we can talk about the pitfalls of self-care and all of that, but I mean I think people can't go 100% all the time. You have to kind of like move in and out, like where you're capable of doing so. So I think that's been two very important things that I've sort of learned, is like how to work with people who are nothing like you and have lots of questions and demands, and how to manage your own shit while doing that.
Yeah. How did you feel the day after the march?
Tired. Tired. Yeah. That was it. I mean, I was just like, I was tired. Yeah. And it was like, I couldn't wrap my head around it at that point. I was just like, I just need my body to like rest.
Yeah. Well, and I think almost getting space from it helps you process it. Yeah. What have you been feeling since the march?
A lot of different things. I mean, I think something I'm sensing a lot in my community right now is a lot of people feel very frustrated, and attention almost seems scattered because it's like you have a lot of, I think there's also a lot of new people sort of moving into this work, and I'm trying my best to be like very patient with that, right? Because I think there tends to be, you know, with like longtime activists, there tends to be this like mentality of like, well, where have you been, right? Which is like on my worst days, I think that, but on my better days, which I try and shoot for, I'm like, or we just not have them at all. Like, I don't, like, how do you, like, we can't say that we want people to do this, and then when they come in with like not the same framework that we do, shut them out, right? Yeah. So there's a balance in that. But I think trying to figure out how you work with that fractured sort of attention span, right? So like we have people who are just trying to figure it out, like what to do. And I think sometimes they take on too much, and sometimes they don't take on anything at all, and sometimes they just argue with each other. Right. And that messiness is part of it. Like, I don't know. And I'm just like, for me, I just continue to do what I do. And I help where I can, and I connect people where I can, and I make sure my own shit is like good enough so that I can go out and do something. Because if it's not, I'm just gonna be like a toxic person out there, like screaming and yelling. Yeah. You know, again, it's kind of like going back to that conversation where the woman kind of cornered me and was like, why aren't people marching? And I'm like, people are doing all sorts of cool stuff, right? Like people are working on a campaign for Stacey Abrams right now. Because, like, how much do I want to see her be governor, right? Like, I want that. Yeah. Or, like, people are, like, in, like, the Georgia Win program, right? Like, the Georgia Win program, all of a sudden, like, their numbers shot up like crazy. Like, all these women are all of a sudden like, well, if that guy can be in charge, like, certainly I can, right? You know, people are starting to engage in all sorts of different ways, and just because it doesn't look the way you want it to or think it should, or like because it's like fractured or messy or whatever, that doesn't mean it's not happening. Like, I think the biggest thing to remember is that, like, this is a long game, right? Like, again, like, going back to that sign at the march, like, this is a long, long game, and, like, I think the things that, like, we're fighting for now are not going to be things that I see get, like, be 100% better in my lifetime.
Right.
And that's just part of it. Like, you kind of have to, like, swallow that pill and be okay with it.
Yeah. How have your family, friends, and colleagues responded to the fact that you marched?
My old job basically ignored all of it.
Oh, really?
And I know that some people definitely complained to them.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
It's just what you do.
I don't really care.
Yeah.
My family, I mean, my mom, I think my family, which is my mom, my grandmother, and my sister, they have really always been supportive, but I think, again, they don't necessarily know how to navigate that.
Yeah.
It's not something that's ever really been in their sort of lexicon. It doesn't mean they're not supportive. It means they don't know how to enter that, or they don't know, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
They just are who they are.
Yeah.
There's definitely, I think, there is definitely a lot of praise from this community, which was like, yay, great, that makes my, like, ego feel wonderful. But it makes me also very nervous, because I feel like it puts a big target on your back. Like, so I was voted best community activist by this, like, local paper here, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yay, that makes my, like, little ego, like, oh, like, cool. But it's also, it's just a paper, right? It's just a paper. It's just, like, someone was like, hey, like, cool, here you go.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, I've had a lot of really interesting interactions where, you know, people will be like, well, you should be doing this because you're voted best community activist. And it's like, no, I am just a person, right? Like, I am just a fucked up person trying to deal with my own shit who, like, wants to do good in this world. Like, I'm not doing anything that you can't do, right? And so I think that's been, like, my biggest thing is, like, people think that, like, I should be leading all the causes, and it's like, no, like, you totally got this, right? So it's, like, trying to have that conversation, like, this doesn't mean anything. Like, all this means is that some people thought it was a good idea, right?
Right.
And, like, I might even disagree with them, right? Because I think there's a ton of people in this community doing thoughtful, awesome work that doesn't get recognition all the time.
Yeah.
And we should be, like, loving them, right? We should be, like, loving on them and supporting them and, like, throwing them some cash, like, when they need it, right? Like, let's give them some cash. But it definitely has been something very interesting to navigate. The idea of, like, what happens when we platform people and then like they fall off the platform and we, you know, it's complicated, I guess.
Yeah. Have you and will you continue to support the mission of the march by attending future marches, events, rallies, letter writing events? If not, why not? If yes, why?
I think if it continues in the direction it is about, which is, again, that big umbrella that touches on many different things, yes. You know, I'm sad I can't be in Atlanta today to, like, you know, march with Janelle and her people, because I think that's really important. And, like, does it make sense for us to do that here? Not really, because we don't have an NRA headquarters. We don't. Why would we go to our city council to do that, right? You know, and I think like the biggest thing for me is watching what happens on, like, a national level, and then sort of how can we interpret that in our own community in a way that makes sense, right? So like what this community is dealing with, like, immediately right now is the shooting that happened in City Market and the death of someone in Savannah who was like very well loved and crucial in this community, but at the same time, many people feel his death has been amplified much louder than people who die every day in Savannah, right? And like, how do we like, you know, how do we navigate that?
Right.
You know, what is the elephant in the room? It is obviously race and poverty, and like that is a conversation like many people in Savannah like are kind of like not ready to have.
Right.
And there are some people having it, right? But a lot of people are just like not ready to have that conversation, even though it is there every day in the fabric. It is like, God loves Savannah, I love it, but like sometimes Sherman should have burned the shit down, right? Like I say that and people react to it in two ways. They're like, oh my God! Or they're like, oh, I totally get what you mean, right? But like, it is still a very antebellum place, and like it seeps into every corner, and like you can't ignore it. And so like we as a community have to like figure that out, and like there's a lot of people who have been like basically been like, we have to talk about this. Like I'm dealing with this every day, and there are people who are just like, that doesn't exist, not in my life. So that's kind of where we're at. So, you know, does the march to the NRA make sense for us locally? Not necessarily. Does it make sense if we sort of take that framework of centering women and people of color and people directly affected and like try and work from there? Yes.
What do you hope will happen? $1 million question, right?
I would love to see more people involved in social justice work, in movement work, in political work. I would love to see more women in office. Something that frustrates me about my movement people who I love dearly is that most of them don't vote. And they're like, I would never like be in a political office. And I'm like, you would be brilliant there. Like, you would be so, like, how badly do I want like a mayor who like talks about restorative justice and like is like, you know, poverty is not going to be solved by like a bunch of white guys sitting in a boardroom. It's going to be solved by like the people who are experiencing it on the daily, right? Like, how badly do we need like smart, thoughtful, like justice-oriented people like making like decisions? Like we need those people. So I very much have sort of veered off into that sort of space. You know, as Stacey Abrams begins her campaign, like I really am very interested in getting behind that and supporting her, even though like I don't see eye to eye with her on many things. The idea that everyone in the Georgia sort of state legislature wants to put a casino down here in Savannah is like terrifying to me, and I'm like, what a great way to destroy this community, right? Like, we don't need that here, right? But do I still think that she is like a person that should be supported for governor? Absolutely. You know, like locally, I'm just like, the school board elections are up, city council will be up, you know, county commission, like, who's going to run for those seats? Like, how can we put you in office? Like, and why do you think you can't run for office? Right? So that's what I want to see.
What do you fear?
What do I fear? I fear for a lot of my friends. I fear for friends who might be deported. I'm really worried about the DACA stuff right now, with certain people who I think are brilliant and amazing, and like what might happen to them. I think if more than anything, I fear violence happening to people I love and care for. You know, I look at the things that are sort of happening throughout the country and how I just fear that for people. You know, I think one of the things that really sort of, I mean, I say this not in the way to be like, oh, I was so shocked it happened, right? Because like none of this stuff is shocking. But there is this moment where, you know, like while we were in DC, we were looking, you know, someone showed me a photo of stuff that was happening here in Savannah. So Amanda Hollowell led the local women's march here, and she did an awesome job, and she is like she's one of those people where I'm like, you lead, I follow, right?
Yeah.
Like, she's someone who I want to see in office and like who I want to see in charge and who I want to tell, who, you know, like she's the person who I'm like, you tell me what to do and I'll do it,
Yeah.
right? So in the response that she led down here, I saw one of the students from the schools that I worked at, and she had this sign and she said, I want to be able to go to school and not be made to feel like an alien.
Mm.
And, you know, as, you know, like a little, like, kid of color, and you're like, fuck.
Yeah.
Like, no, I don't, like
it shouldn't
even...
be something
Yeah. It's,
yeah.
And it's, I say that, and people are like, well, yeah, but that's the reality of it. Like, that's, like, you know, that is the fabric of, like, living as, like, a person of color in America. But at the same time, you're just, like, that is the stuff I fear becoming even more commonplace than it is now, right? I fear a generation of young people growing up and thinking it is normal for the person who runs the country to be someone who's admitted to sexual assault, who makes fun of, you know, differently abled people, who, like, you know, is openly racist, and, like, you know, I fear for that, right? And, like, I fear, I think more than anything, I fear that once this administration is done and maybe we get someone more progressive minded in there, that the people who were fighting really hard will stop fighting.
Yeah.
And I think that to me is like very upsetting because I think, yes, we should be reacting to this administration, but like, yes, you should also be reacting to the fact that there are so many unfair things in this like world, and like you should be doing something about it, right? Like just because you're uncomfortable doesn't mean when you get comfortable again you can quit.
Right.
So that I think those are the things that I fear the most.
Do you feel that the movement can maintain momentum? If so, how?
I don't know. I think sometimes, again, the thing we do to movement that's really unfair is that we expect it to be 100% all the time. And movements don't work like that. Sometimes it's 150%, and sometimes it's scaled back and it's 20%.
Yeah.
And both have to move in and out. And I think what has to be managed are people's expectations of that. Change does not happen overnight. It is a long, boring, steady kind of like foot forward. Then you get pushed back 20 feet and you're like, okay, foot forward. So I think the patience needed to sort of sustain something like that is really crucial. How that will play out, I don't know. When I see people getting frustrated now, I'm like, you can't get frustrated. Like, you have to just keep doing what you're doing, right? Like, I understand you hate the orange guy. I understand you think all of this is bullshit. I get it. Like,
join the club.
Yeah, like, you know, like, I got you, sister.
Yeah.
But like, you can't let that sort of define every fabric of your life. You have to just like commit to doing this, and like sometimes it's gonna feel like a win, but most of the time you take a lot of losses, and like that's part of it.
Yeah.
I don't know, like it's just you keep doing it.
Yeah. Did any part of the march surprise you? And then they have notes like people, speakers, new experiences.
I think, again, sort of just the care for other people in the vicinity was really surprising. And it shouldn't be, because we should always be caring for
right.
another, right? But I think that is, that was something that was really crucial. And very shortly after the Women's March, I basically, the group that I organized with locally, we were able to take about 11 community members up to Detroit for a learning journey.
Oh, wow.
drove like 18 hours to Detroit, and just like learn from what people are doing up there, right? And I think folks in Detroit know the necessity of being able to rely on one another and sort of like creating a community of care and how important that is. And I don't see that in a lot of spaces that I travel in. And how important that is to sustaining anything or to doing anything. But again, it's always surprising to see that when you don't see it all the time.
How have you felt about the new government's activities since the march?
I think it's all bullshit. It's terrible, right? It's terrible. But is it similar to what like Reagan was doing? Is it? I mean, yes, it's ramped up, and yes, it's very specific, but it's also like there have been people who have felt targeted by like whatever administration has been in office. Like back in probably March or February, we had a bunch of ICE raids in Savannah, and people were freaking out because they were like, Trump has sent ICE into our community. And I was like, not to like knock on Obama, because like love me some Obama, like think he's the best, like cannot get enough photos of like him hanging out with kids, right? Like love that. But like there were ICE raids under Obama too, and like Obama didn't specifically send them here, but like
they were still operational.
but they were still operating here in this community, right? And so like I think there have been people who have been feeling under attack no matter what, right? Like, yes, Obama was in charge and it was great, but like I still was like, holy shit, like, like my reproductive rights hang on Ruth Bader Ginsburg's like retirement or like someone's death, right? And that's like that is terrifying. And I don't forget that. Did I feel safe from sexual assault under Obama? Not really, right? Like but sometimes that I think the thing that is like most specific about this administration is just like how overtly obvious it all is, right?
No,
so
they're
like
not
this
even
whole
hiding.
You're not even hiding, like, and then you like throw in the fake news and all of it, you're just like, oh my god, like this is bizarre, right? It's just bizarre.
What strategies can you suggest for people to cope?
I have found it very helpful to get off Facebook. Again, like, I think the thing that has been, there's just so much information out there, and people, I think, wanting to be helpful go to Facebook and then talk about all of it, and then post all the articles, and then post all the things that they're outraged about, and it's like, I can't.
Well, they feel better maybe, but
you feel better. I'm just like, oh god, like that's just like it's too much, right? It's like too much, and I think the thing that's like really frustrating right now too is like, again, this like whole thing on like fake news. It's like I think when we talk about it, we kind of like look at it in like the frame of mind of like being a Republican thing, but like I see like a lot of like my like lefty friends like posting bullshit articles. And I'm like, that is bullshit. Don't get your news from Occupy Democrats. Like, that is not a real news source. Like, don't get it from Mind Body Green. Like, no.
That's not a reputable source.
Right, that's not a reputable source. And I know it confirms, like, your belief, but, like, it's not, like, you're getting maybe a fact and then a lot of opinion, right? So, like, I think that's been something that's been really a very advantageous conversation to have with many people.
But so your solution was just to get off Facebook completely?
Not completely, but I step back, and there are just like certain spaces where I've decided to be like, this is where I know where I'm effective. And like, I can do these, I can only do so many things, and like, I will do these things really well, and like, when I need to step back, I step back. And where I need to support and amplify, I will absolutely do it. Like, I don't need to be leading everything. I don't need to be hollering really loud. I just need to know, like, where I can do what I do well. And just help where I can. And I think that I would love to see more people taking a similar approach as opposed to just putting every article on Facebook, right?
Be more effective in what you put your energy into.
Yeah.
What would your advice be for anyone who is considering going to a march in the future?
Just do it. Do it and be respectful of people around you. Watch out for people around you and just make sure that they're okay. Listen to people. You might not have to agree with everything they say, but it's good to just hear them out. And when I say that, I mean, like, you don't have to hold space for the Trump supporter who's, like, saying that if you had an abortion, you're going to hell, right? You don't have to do that. That's not what I'm advocating for. But I think, like, something that the women's movement sort of will always probably struggle with is sort of the messiness of intersectional living and life, right? So if, like, you're a woman who's never had to deal with your white privilege, like, it's really good to, like, probably listen to, like, a woman of color, right? You should probably do that. Being uncomfortable is a good thing, right? You will probably always be safe, but be uncomfortable.
Right.
I mean, it sounds really trite, but just, like, be kind, right? Like, I think it's, like, way too easy to be a fucking asshole. It just is. Like, and I see it on I see it in every side, right? Like, I see it with, like, again, like, thoughtful, kind people who are just, like, assholes to, like, people who just, like, are not on the same level. And I'm like, I get it. It makes me feel really good, too. But, like, I might need that person, like, later on when we decide to, like, go to City Hall, right? Yeah. And, like, if I've kind of, like, shut them out because, like, we don't speak the same language yet, or, like, they don't know certain lingo, like, I just feel good about myself. Like, there's this, like, really wonderful piece of writing out right now called Kinesthetic, Excommunicate Me from the Church of Social Justice. And I was like, yes, someone has described what I feel. And I forget who wrote it, but, like, they are this, like, extremely, like, thoughtful, brilliant writer, but their whole point was that, like, if we're gonna do this, we gotta do it for everyone. And that means, like, for the people you disagree with, for the people you have a different approach with, like, for even the people that, like, hate you, right? Like, you're not here just to liberate yourself, you're here to liberate them too, right? Which, like, sounds very pie in the sky.
Right.
But, like, ultimately, like, what does that look like? That just means being able to, like, walk in this world without, like, having to contort or hide yourself in some way. Or worry for yourself, right? So, it basically was just kind of talking about how we spend so much time sometimes kind of, like, policing one another that we don't make space for the fact that, like, things are going to be different and messy and painful, and we need all of that. And we have to, like, take people in if we're going to do this. Yeah.
Sounds really interesting.
That's a great article. I was like, someone put into words the feelings I can't describe. Right?
Well, so that's the end of our questions, but is there anything we didn't talk about that you want to talk about?
No, not that I can think of. Okay. I feel like I've blabbed for, like, a really long time, so thank you for your patience.
That was great.